Change my mind. Change my mind.
Hey, welcome to the podcast, Change My Mind. I'm your host, Lynda Steele. And today I kind of want to talk about the gold rush of 2026. And it actually has nothing to do with gold, but it also has nothing to do with tech or real estate. And it has everything to do with what might actually be in your medicine cabinet right now. We're talking about weight loss drugs because they have exploded into the public consciousness. And I don't know about you, but if you're watching a hockey game, for example, during the NHL playoffs, you'll notice that in the intermission when you're watching the hosts, the whole set is virtually wrapped in the words Ozempic, 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 Ozempic everywhere. And now it's actually Wegovy, Wegovy, Wegovy. And these are two of the most popular brand names for these weight loss drugs. And it just struck me as odd. I thought I'm watching professional athletes, really fit guys, and the program is flogging weight loss drugs. That's interesting to me. But what's more startling is the fact that there are some really major professional athletes that are now shilling for companies that are selling weight loss drugs, like Serena Williams.
I'm feeling better on Roe. I'm Serena Williams. This is me on Roe.
These drugs are really popular, and they're actually called semaglutides or GLP-1s. They work really well for a lot of people, and that's why so many Canadians are taking them. There's something like 1 million Canadians taking these drugs, which isn't surprising because it's estimated that 1 in 4 British Columbians is considered to be obese. 1 in 4. Like, that's astonishing. These drugs work in kind of simple, mysterious ways, but what they do is they control your blood sugar, they slow your digestion, and they make you feel fuller longer. And the best part, I think, is they sort of turn off that little voice in your head that is thinking, oh, I want to eat a bag of chips, or, oh, what am I going to eat next? That's the thing that sabotages most diets. So these drugs are really quite incredible when you think about it. And the only problem is that they're really expensive. So it costs about $450 a month. A lot of people don't have coverage. So that's a lot of money to lose weight, right? Unless you're really, really serious about it or you have a real serious health condition. But there is some good news on two fronts. One of them is that Canada is poised to become one of the first countries in the world to approve generic versions of these drugs. And that's going to cut the cost by hundreds of dollars a month, which will make these drugs really accessible to way more people. The other good thing is that there is a doctor right here in Metro Vancouver who started a petition to try to get the province and pharmacare, frankly, to cover these drugs for anybody who needs them. We're going to talk to her in a little bit, so stay tuned for that. But first of all, I was thinking to myself in doing research for this podcast that I really wish these drugs were available when my mom was alive, because she dieted and struggled with her weight every goddamn day of her adult life. I mean, it was really sad. She was someone who had a sweet tooth and she would hide chocolate bars in the back of the freezer. And if one of us kids found them and ate them, oh my God, there was hell to pay. But she had a tough time. And as a kid, especially a girl watching a mom, you start to develop some kind of weird thoughts around food and dieting in your own head. And I remember the exact moment that my lifelong obsession with weight began as well. I was 18 years old, which is sad. I was 18 years old and I was in the women's washroom at the Athabasca pub in Hinton, Alberta. And I was wearing my favorite jeans and my girlfriend said, not very kindly, I might add, "Oh, Lynda, you look like you're putting on some weight, eh?" And I remember just being thunderstruck, like, what? For some reason, I had not noticed that I was putting on weight. And she was maybe unkind, but she was also accurate. I had been putting on weight, and I don't know why I didn't notice that my pants were too tight. So I went off on a lifelong journey myself of alternately being, oh, I wish I could get rid of that last 10 pounds. Oh, now we're at 20 pounds I need to get rid of. I think at my heaviest, it was maybe 25, okay, I'm going to be honest, maybe 30 even pounds that I had to lose. And I have struggled with it. I have not eaten what I wanted to eat. I have worked out when I didn't feel like it. So, am I interested in these drugs? Yeah. Do I have questions? Oh, hell yeah, I do. So, let's bring in producer Melanie Nagy for a discussion and a setup of our guest. Hi, Mel. You must know some people in your life who are taking these drugs or you suspect they're taking them.
Yes, on both accounts. Yes to taking them, yes to suspecting them. These drugs are unavoidable in conversation, on social media, advertisements, whether it's your advertisements online or in magazines, they're everywhere. I really do feel
Mm.
that you can't escape them. And I think it's really interesting because everybody has people have different personal approaches to weight and stories and trauma with weight. But then there's a flip side too, where there is also, the movement of celebrating body and accepting body. So I find it a really interesting topic in how we balance it, whether it's the access issue that you talked about, whether it's how do you avoid body shaming in connection with these? Like, what's wrong with someone's body that they might feel they have to take these? There's so many questions to explore and navigate. And that's why I think we have the perfect guest today. I know you mentioned Dr. Ali Zentner. She is a Vancouver-based physician. She spent over 2 decades specializing in metabolic medicine and obesity. She's the founder of Revolution Medical Clinic. That's one of Canada's largest public obesity clinics. She's an advocate for treating obesity from the lens as a chronic disease rather than a failure, like a personal failure or a personal failure of willpower. And through that, she's also written a book about the issue. It's called The Weight Loss Prescription. She's also started a movement called No Fat Shame. And that's all about ending weight bias in medicine and changing the way doctors treat and talk about obesity, because it's a really interesting thing. You mentioned some of the people that I know that are exploring those drugs. They've actually even faced stigma and judgment from their doctor. So there's so much to explore. Dr. Ali Zentner, I think she's going to be the perfect person for you to connect with and explore all your questions.
I have so many questions. So, Mel, you're going to stand back and you're going to come back in after the conversation, and we're going to have a little bit of a debrief to see whether or not I've changed my mind about these drugs. So, I'm looking forward to talking to you in about a half an hour or so. Dr. Zentner, thank you so much for spending some time with us. We really appreciate it.
It's a pleasure. Absolutely, Lynda. Thanks.
Now, I come from a family that has struggled with weight. My mom, bless her soul, she's not with us anymore, but she really spent an entire lifetime dieting. And it was a struggle. And the family used to make fun of her, like, oh, Thelma's the fat one in the family. Even though I look back now at these family reunion photos and I think, every single one of us could have lost a minimum of 5, 10, 15, up to 50 pounds. So I think that we get this weird sort of idea that it's someone else's got a problem and we're all fine. And I just wonder if we could just talk about the stigma off the top here. What do you see, and how difficult is it for people who are really struggling with their weight? Because there seems to be this idea that it's a lack of personal responsibility or something.
I think you almost summarized it beautifully in that comment. Like, one, Thelma was the one with the problem. And if we look back, everybody else had do you see what I mean? Like, I think in and of itself, and it's not to call you out at all, Lynda, but as a society, this seems to be the last vestige that it's just okay to pick and poke. And I think if we break it down, first and foremost, when we talk about so and so should lose X amount of weight, there is no such thing as a goal weight. The quote standard that we adhere to about ideal weight is a complete emperor has no clothes kind of moment. Like that comes from, you know, if we want to even talk about where, quote, the concept of ideal weight comes from, that's back in the 1800s when an astrologer named Adolf Quetelet wanted to find out what the average man looked like at the time. So he took the heights and weights of the Scottish and Flemish army and he came up with the body mass index. And that's the standard that your beloved mother, Thelma, fabulous name, by the way,
Yeah, thank you.
would have absolutely been adhering to in terms of numbers, and growing up probably in a Weight Watchers society. And so we see there's that piece to it. And we'll come back to that in a minute, but that's the vestiges of dieting culture running rampant through our society, and talking about issues around sort of personal responsibility and personal fault, etc., which we're seeing emerge in conversations around health now in a very detrimental way. So there's that one piece. When we talk about stigma and weight bias in society, it's the one area where everywhere it permeates, and part of it, I would argue, is a bit of a feminist issue. Women were told for decades, if not centuries, that our physicality determined our value and our acceptance and our worth in this world. And unfortunately, medicine co opted that and said, oh, yes, and your health as well. And so now conversations that used to happen around vanity and appearance have now been, quote, almost in a weird, twisted way, reframed around health. But we still equate size with health, which is completely wrong. How do you break that stigma, and how do you break that discussion? Or how do you start that discussion?
Well, and I'm curious about that too, because I fall into the trap of thinking, wow, that model is 5'11" and she weighs 120 pounds. And I think, oh my God, I must be obese then because she's way taller than me and I weigh more than that. So there's so much that's wrong about the way we think about how much people weigh.
Yeah, I think it's important to break that down even further. So understand that I don't think we would have the same discussion if we were talking how tall people were, would we? Right. So remember that weight is as genetic as height and eye color, and well, hair color is not genetic. It's what my colorist tells me. But um, you know, hand size, foot size, etc. So there is there are 5,500 genes at play here, period, that determine everything from whether or not you have a sweet tooth to where you put your weight, how much weight we'll all lose and gain in our lifetimes, how we respond to treatment. All of that's genetics. And that's even beyond the genetics of the genes you got from Thelma and your dad, but it's also the genes that we as a species evolved to select for by just the idea that, think about it, as a species, we would have selected for genes that prevented famine. We would have selected for genes that prevented us from dying of starvation, or what we call thrifty genes. And what we see is an expression of those thrifty genes in times of stressors. So when physiologically your body's exposed to stressors, we think of genes as they turn on when we're a baby and that's it. But our genes turn on and off throughout our lifetimes in response to certain stressors. Absolutely. We're also dealing with what's called a neurohormonal feedback mechanism. So every organ in your body talks to every other organ in your body through a series of hormones. And in this case, you're dealing with the most important hormonal conversation in the world, because if you think about it for a minute, if there's no gas in the tank, then the engine doesn't run. So your body's energy regulatory system is more important than how often you breathe or how many times your heart beats in a minute, because none of those things are going to happen if there's no gas, so to speak. So we as a species have 37 different hormones that regulate this. Your brain talks to your gut talks back, and that's from mouth to anus. There are hormones throughout. We know that your fat and muscle tissue also produce about half a dozen different hormones each, storage hormones, usage hormones, etc. In your brain, you even have part of the brain called the hypothalamus, which is subconscious, and it controls things like body temperature, sleep-wake cycles, blood pressure, respiratory system, etc. But it also has a part of the brain called the arcuate nucleus, which literally has hunger neurons and fullness neurons. Not even I feel hungry and I feel full, but gas tank full, gas tank empty. So for example, there's even conditions where if, for example, there's a part of the brain, if you have a stroke in the arcuate nucleus, you can actually eat yourself to death.
Wow.
Right. So So just as an aside, so this is highly regulated. So who's to say we and it's interesting because 50 years ago we used to think depression was just you wanted to be sad and you chose to
Mm,
do that. Now we understand depression is an inflammatory brain disease that is highly regulated by a bunch of different neurotransmitters and it's chemical. So why is it that we still think that why we gain weight is because my patients are sitting on a couch eating chocolate and watching television and not exercising enough? That's ridiculous. Like, it's not just mean, it's stupid. Like, fine. I say to people, you know what? You want to be mean, but don't be dumb. Like, and and I get that a lot from like patients who are not patients, from people who are like, oh, you're just, you're just giving people a free ride. I'm like, no, you're just being dumb. Like, if you want to think that, go for it. But the earth is round. You can think it's flat, but dude, it's round. Sorry. So that's what I am, the hypothetical dude who's
I
giving
know.
me crap feedback. But I just say the idea here, like I have this, your listeners can't hear, but I have a very fabulously thick head of hair. And it's not because I drink or eat protein. It's just my dad. Okay, he had a really great head and that. Like, there's so many things in this world that are genetic that we accept, right? Intelligence is a huge one, or quote talent. Like, I am going to take singing lessons till the day I die, but I'm never going to be Beyonce. She's just got innate talent. And so you're telling me, and you're not, but this is a highly sophisticated regulatory system that the brain that we have evolved over thousands of years. And I'll take it one step further and say this to you. Think about it for a second. If you don't want to die of a famine, you better do two things really well. You better hunt food and you better store fat. And anyone who's ever been on a diet has experienced this firsthand. You go into what's called starvation response. So you lose weight and then you stop. And that's an activation of the storage system of starvation response. And then all of a sudden you have cravings through the roof. You dream about food tastes better, etc. And that's the activation of the brain, a part of the brain that's known as our craving center that makes us good hunters. So we have these two systems in our body that are activated at all times that some of us have just, shall we say, an overactivation of,
Right.
right? So just like some people, we have an activation of an excess heart rate and patients go into atrial fibrillation, or like there's sometimes organs don't do their part and the body just goes left when it shouldn't. And that's what we're seeing here. Now, why are we seeing an overwhelming population around this? Well, I think twofold. One, there are an enormous amount of environmental stressors that make it very easy for the brain to go into starvation response, number one. And number two, our diagnostic tool for what classifies as, quote, obesity is based on an 1870s astrologer's chart. So remember that, yes, in some patients, obesity is very much a disease, meaning a biological dysregulation that affects how you move through the world. In some of us, it's just a risk factor, but in everybody, it's a social construct.
Good grief. I mean, I've learned so much in just the
Right.
last few minutes there.
Don't you
But
want
I
to
mean,
gather your family together and just contact your
yes.
mom and say, we're really sorry. We were total jerks.
Exactly. And let me ask you this then, because I really think that I wish these GLP-1s were available when my mom was alive, because she had such a struggle her whole life. And I've got some friends who have tried these drugs and they've really worked for them, who have described them as being like game changers
Right.
or miracle drugs. I mean, what are you
Right.
hearing? What are you seeing in your practice?
So remember, let's go back to starvation response and let's explain how these medications work. Right. So if the brain thinks it's starving, it stores and it hunts, right? And your friends who tell you they're game changers say, I don't get it. I eat what I want and I lose weight. So what are these medications? Well, so the goal of treatment, right, should be to trick a starving brain into thinking it's not starving, right? Well, what better way to trick a starving brain than to give it a hormone it only gets in the presence of food, right? Anyone who's ever taken the birth control pill knows you can't get pregnant when you're pregnant, thank goodness. And so you take a pill that tells your brain you're pregnant, right? It's a hormonal trick. Well, if your brain thinks there's a famine and it's going to store and hunt, then you give it a hormone that you normally get when you eat. Well, so semaglutide, which is called Ozempic or Wegovy, depending on what you take it for, same drug, fun fact. It's a copy of a single gut hormone called GLP-1. And most people have heard the expression, it takes 20 minutes for your stomach to tell your brain you're full. It's
Mhm.
not your stomach talking. It's 20 minutes for food to go from your mouth to your small intestine. And when food hits the small intestine, again with the hormones, half a dozen hormones are released from the small intestine to tell the brain a meal's arrived. One of those hormones is GLP-1, another one's called GIP, another one is released from the liver called glucagon, another one's released from the small intestine called amylin. I'll tell you why I'm naming those hormones because they all become very important. So semaglutide is a GLP-1 analog. You may have heard of another drug called tirzepatide, which is Mounjaro or Zepbound, depending on what you use it for. Well, it's GLP and GIP, which are both released by the small intestine. Fun fact, GIP was first sort of discovered in Canada. So it's a BC-based hormone, actually. Well, there's a new medication called survodutide that'll probably be released in Canada in the next year and a half. It's sitting in front of Health Canada, and it's GLP glucagon agonist. There's cagrinolide with semaglutide, which is a GLP amylin agonist, which is coming probably in the next year or so. You're going to hear about all of these. There's another one called retatrutide, which is a triple gut hormone of three. So the idea here is, remember when Prozac launched and we said it was like a copy of it was like it helped serotonin stay in the brain, right? And
Mhm.
then all of a sudden you saw 5 different antidepressants, and now you have serotonin reuptake inhibitors, dopamine reuptake inhibitors, you have norepinephrine, you have all these different ones. So in other words, what I'm saying is there's a similarity here. We've cracked a code and we've realized that these drugs don't work by making people eat less because the problem never has been math. Your mother, bless her, didn't eat too much and not exercise enough. That's not what was causing the issue. She might have at times had more cravings and ate, but that was a symptom of a starving brain and not the cause of the weight gain, right?
Okay, well,
And
now
so
that's really interesting because so many people then are, we see influencers and we see former athletes like Serena Williams and actors and all these people suddenly, on Ozempic or a drug like that. So my question is, who are these drugs really for? Can they be for everyone? Or are they really meant for people who are dealing with the disease of obesity?
Linda, do we only do abortions for women who are raped?
Okay, that's very interesting because we're also talking about
Boys.
microdosing and things like that too. So, as for me, even I've thought, oh, maybe this is something I could look into myself.
I think it's more of a philosophical question. And remember that the genie has officially left the bottle, right? And the genie left the bottle not because of these medications, but the genie left the bottle with dieting. So I'll give you an example. No one has a problem with a woman of any size going on a diet and watching what she's eating. But people all of a sudden are deciding who takes what medication. Now, I should tell you, I am a physician. I am a specialist in obesity medicine. I believe there should be guidelines around, you know, like there should be parameters around who gets what treatment, period. It's not like a pizza for everybody, right? Like we don't do chemo prophylactically for cancer. Absolutely, right? So there are criteria that we need to adhere to around medical safety, right? Safety and efficacy, period. However, with that said, it comes down on a broader topic, it comes down to choice and agency. And I would argue I am never, and I hear this all the time, but I am never a fan of someone practicing medicine without a license. So I don't think that, and I mean, I realize there's some irony here that we're having a podcast discussion for mainstream, but I don't believe that my patients should get the bulk of their medical information from TikTok. I don't even have an account, full disclosure. I don't First of all, I think we've gone the pendulum has swung so far in one direction. It used to be that medicine used its own language and there was such, don't ask, don't tell, and there was a huge secrecy, but it's almost too much access and too much freedom of information and less sort of gatekeeping around what's what. And I mean, a perfect example is every one of my patients can go online and look at their labs and then they Google and wait for the word cancer to appear, and they've already self-diagnosed themselves based on their laboratory situation. So I think we've swung so far. Microdosing is a perfect example. One of the reasons people microdose, probably the biggest one, is cost. So I would argue I have a bigger issue with the fact that these medications have become a niche product for people of means and not like we're not having real conversations around who should really take this. Because right now in Canada in particular, never mind the US, they've got other, I mean, don't get me started, but in a Canadian system, which is a socialized healthcare system, which is a system that in theory, God bless Tommy Douglas, this should be based on need. And for those of you who don't know who Tommy Douglas is, he is the father of socialized healthcare and worth knowing about. And here's the TikToky fun fact. He is Kiefer Sutherland's grandfather.
Wow,
However,
yeah. Can
yes,
I just stop you for a second because I just want to ask one thing. Are you saying that anyone should be able to access these drugs? No? Okay.
no, I am saying that this is a conversation that everyone should be able to have with their physician or healthcare provider to learn if this is an appropriate treatment for them. So let's take you. You said, I've even thought about this for myself. And
Right.
you're not someone who would meet criteria to take these medications, meaning your body mass index is not above a certain number, which it's hysterical because we just spent a few minutes, can I swear on this podcast or
Sure.
no?
Go ahead.
We just spent a few minutes shit talking the BMI,
Mm.
absolutely. And now we're like, we still use it as criteria for medication, absolutely. However, I will say, let's say you're someone at high risk for cardiovascular disease, or you've even had cardiac disease, and let's say you're someone with a metabolic liver disease or a fatty liver, is the old term we used. Well, these drugs are indicated for that. So isn't that a conversation that you would like to have with a professional? Right? Like, so do you see what I mean? Like, this is a conversation that you should have with your doctor and and that we should discuss risk and benefit and what you can anticipate, etc. Just like you would with any other drug.
I hear you, but I also watch CNN and cable shows where they're coming
Sure.
up at 10 o'clock at night and saying, would you like some generic Viagra? Just punch in 424242. I
Sure.
mean, are we going to get to the point where people can get it online or through a black market and they shouldn't
Oh,
really
they
be taking
already
it?
can. 100%.
Okay.
But that doesn't mean they should be. So again, it's why you and I are having a conversation, right? And we're having a long one for sure, or like more than 5 minutes, absolutely. But the idea around this is, do I think that drugs should be advertised on TV to the extent that they are being advertised? Absolutely not. But I'm a realist and I understand that, I'm a Canadian physician, which is a whole different ballgame, but I understand that healthcare in most parts of the world is still a business. I don't think I like that aspect of it. I don't agree with it. But I think I'd like to think that the people that I see every single day still have a degree of respect for my authority and for, my not even authority is probably not the right word, for my
Expertise.
expertise and
Mm.
for my experience and all of that. And so, so I think, and I say this to patients all the time, like validity doesn't come from personal experience. It comes from years of practice, right? It's fascinating to me that the 10,000 hours rule applies everywhere but in medicine, which I think is hysterical, right? It's like, so, I have patients who come in and go, well, I've talked to a whole bunch of people about this and I'd like to try this. And the comment I always say is, all right, you're in trouble with the law. Do you go down to a prison and ask the inmates what worked or didn't work for them? Or do you call a lawyer?
I mean, you're making a lot of great points, and I want to back this up to cost because it's almost like a two-tiered system for
It is a
people. These
two-tiered
are
system.
these
Not
are
all
expensive.
like a two-tiered system. It's a two-tiered system that ironically, the house always wins kinds of things. This saves the healthcare system. Like we know these drugs pay for themselves within a year in terms of treatment. But I also think, to your
Can
point,
you
you said,
explain that first before you go on? How do they pay for themselves?
well, prevention, right? So we know, for example, there's data to show that, let's say, tirzepatide or Zepbound, 50% reduction in sleep apnea. So if you have sleep apnea, and let's say you stop breathing 60 times an hour, you literally have a 50% reduction in the amount of times you stop breathing. So many patients who, let's say, have moderate sleep apnea go from moderate to mild on these medications. Let's also talk about percentages. So I know we said numbers don't matter, but no one believes that. Let's be honest. Chief among them, patients. Absolutely
Mm,
not. And this is where you have science butting up against dieting culture, which is what we're seeing here, right? And so the reality is, and you talk about this, like, TikTok and influencers and everything, that's dieting culture. So it's same game, different rules, if you will, so to speak, or, same rules, different games, so to speak. But it's that idea of the dieting culture still talking about it because, and it's interesting to me and about all of it and about sort of the discussions that we have about the death of dieting culture but let's be honest, my patients and my colleagues learned everything they need to know, and I put that in huge air quotes, about weight and diet from dieting culture, which is all
right.
garbage. So there's that. So just to your point, the idea around, cost and that, the drugs themselves, you have a 90% reduction in development of type 2 diabetes. You have a 10 to 20% body weight loss in the vast majority of patients. Some lose more, some lose less. The newer agents like the dual agonists or the triple agonists, you're talking about 20 to 25%. In fact, nowadays, when I started practice 25 years ago, 5% body weight loss in the old drugs was considered a gift. Now if it's not 15% or more, it's a crap drug, so to speak. So it's quite impressive. But these drugs, also 20% reduction in heart attack and stroke, treatment of metabolic liver disease, which is the leading cause of liver cirrhosis in North America. So you're talking prevention. I mean, I run a program in BC called Get to Surgery where we help patients who've been told by their orthopedic surgeons, lose weight and then I'll take care of your knee.
Right.
We work with them with a medical approach, not a dietary approach, but just medical approach. And we get them to joint replacement surgery. But in 1 year, we took 10 patients off a joint replacement list. Well, at $10,000 a joint, that's a lot of money saved,
Which
right?
is
So
great. And I do know that there's two things that are happening that I think are, make people feel optimistic. One of them being that Canada is kind of looking at approving some generic versions, which should bring the cost down. But also you're behind a petition to try to get government to cover the cost for people who really need these drugs.
yeah, I think I've been knocking on government's door for a while now. It's interesting what's happening it's unfortunately it's 2 step forward, 3 steps back a lot of times. A petition is one thing, but absolutely the issue will be this. Right now, these medications, they started off at being far more expensive than they even are now. So for example, semaglutide in the form of the trade name Wegovy, which is a 2.4 milligram dosing, used to be about $450 a month. It's now $288. Okay, so the drugs are coming down. Part of it is that in Canada, in particular, semaglutide has lost its patent. So that means that it invites generic companies to basically copy the drug. And there are 9 generics sitting in front of Health Canada waiting for approval, including, well, actually not, because the generic that's produced by Novo Nordisk, which is the company that produces Wegovy and Ozempic, already has approval by Health Canada. Why? Because it's essentially the non-generic, like they don't need approval, right? So they just cross out the name and put in whatever their new name will be. Absolutely. But they lost their patent in January. And again, it takes time for Health Canada to approve generics. And our governmental, and I'm not like dissing Health Canada, but it's fascinating to me the sort of time it takes around these sort of approval experiences. I'm not asking them to fast track, but we have had years of experience with GLP-1s. Like, for example, when people say these drugs are new, I'm like 2019. Like, so semaglutide was approved in Canada for use in 2019. That's 7 years ago. Like, that's a long time.
Well,
Absolutely.
that is a long time, but I do wonder about the long-term safety. Like,
Yes.
what do we know if someone's been on these drugs for 20 years, 25
Right,
years?
Lynda,
Do
you
we,
want a drug, you're not going to get that. So that's not how science works. So the good news about that is, I'll give you an example. How long you been using a cell phone for?
yeah, a long time, decades.
You've got earbuds in your ears, by the way. Yeah.
Yes.
What's the long-term data on the use of earbuds for radiation? I'm just curious,
You're
Lynda.
you're nailing me to, okay, I get it, right? That we don't
Right.
know about a lot of things.
We don't, but that doesn't mean we need to. I don't know about you. I don't want a drug from 1940,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? I don't.
Yeah.
Do you want to drive a 1940s car? I mean,
No.
it's cute, but it's not safe, is it?
No.
Right? Yes. I want a drug that has gone through rigorous testing, that has had double-blind randomized placebo-controlled trials with thousands of patients, that has been tested on women, not just on men, like most drugs were up until now, that has at least 50% of, of the patient population that has been tested to be somebody who might look like me, absolutely, in a modern day. And I want rigorous accountability and reporting, etc. None of that existed 30 years ago.
Fair enough.
So
And
how science moves forward is, I agree. I get that people want, they worry about it's leftover from the thalidomide world of we told
yes.
what, right? But that's not happening anymore, right? And so, for example, I'll give you the opposite. You know how many drugs we said we weren't sure were safe in pregnancy that now we use in pregnancy because we have that kind of data? So
Mhm.
there is the opposite effect that's happening. I'm not saying, but I'll give you an example. Metformin was a classic drug. I was talking about it with one of my students today. And when I graduated medical school, we didn't use metformin in pregnancy, and now it's mainstream because the safety data is there. So I get that people are worried about, 20, 30 years from now, what's this going to look like? I totally understand that. But what they don't also consider is 20, 30 years of untreatment. What does that look like? And I've been around long enough to know that medicine in particular, physicians are divided into what we call early adopters or wait and seers.
Mm.
And, you know, and my patients have done the wait and see for a long enough time now. And all of it's one thing if it was 1 or 2 studies, but the mounting amount of evidence towards the safety and the efficacy of these medications over, and remember, a drug that launches 7 years ago was actually studied for at least 4 or 5 beforehand. So you have, and let's understand when we're talking about semaglutide, there was liraglutide before it, which launched 5 years before that. So this class of medications has at least 15 years of data. And so when you say to me you want long-term data, what I say to you is how long? Like, is 15 years good enough?
Yeah.
Is it
No,
20?
you're making a
We need
good point.
50? And I don't
My
mean to sound
question
like
now is, no, when you talk about length of time too, because I do know some friends who are on it, have lost weight and then actually went off it because they lost too much weight and are now back on it. So my question is, do you have to be on it forever? And what happens when you come off it? Does that mess up your metabolism?
So let's go back to your brain is starving,
Okay.
right? So we trick your brain into thinking it's not starving and it doesn't store and it doesn't hunt. What happens when we wake your brain up again and go, psych? Can you take your glasses off? You're wearing glasses for those of
Yes.
us.
Hmm.
Right. How well can you see without them?
I can see okay. I can get
Okay.
by.
Yes. So your eyes really aren't learning from those glasses, are they?
Right. No.
Right. Medications for chronic disease, apart from antibiotics and pain relief, which is what the vast majority of Canadians take medications for chronic disease. In fact, most diseases nowadays, apart from infections and acute pain, are chronic, right? They are not an education for the body. They're a compensation for what the body's not doing in the first place. And it's
Got it.
funny to me because that argument is never made. Let's take out the word obesity and say, I take medications for my blood pressure. No one ever says, well, once my blood pressure gets to target, I'm stopping my meds. No one ever,
Oh God,
that
that
is
makes so much
right.
sense,
But
when you
it's
put it that way.
right. So it's bias. So it's the fact that, oh, and again, a lot of these arguments that are being made are the dieting world's dying literally, and so it's fighting back. Another example that we hear a lot about is what's called sarcopenia or muscle loss. No one ever complained about muscle loss from diet and exercise or starvation diets, which happens absolutely. Like, let's be clear, can I tell you fun fact?
Mhm.
Science, anytime you lose weight, it doesn't matter how you do it, whether it's starvation program, whether it's a liquid diet, whether it's keto, whether it's medication, whether it's bariatric surgery, any way you lose weight, 25% of that weight loss will be muscle. And there's a specific amount of minimum exercise that you have to do. And even then, that 25% muscle loss goes down to 10%. So you can expect a minimum of 10% muscle loss no matter what. Why? Because that's just the way of all flesh. Now, no one cared about that when Oprah did her liquid diet, remember in the day, and she
Mhm.
pulled the,
When she
like,
pulled the card out with the fat on it.
poor Oprah with her jeans and everything. Oh my God, she's lost 25% muscle mass. But now that she's on this medication, the world's in an uproar. I'm like, really, people? That's amusing. That is really impressively amusing.
Can I just ask you one more question? Because I know I can't keep you here
'Cause you're gonna
forever,
go back
but
to your friends and really set them straight. I love it. It's all
I'm
yes.
curious, like many
I will
drugs.
say this, I don't believe that they lost too much weight. I'd love to
Okay.
see how that was because your body won't let you do that. Like,
Okay.
realistically, your body has a bottom and it doesn't do it. In fact, there is no, if you are losing too much weight, there's something else going on.
Okay, good to know. Let me ask you this one last question. Often we find when a drug is introduced for one thing, it ends up having this astonishingly positive
Viagra.
benefit in something else. And I think I read somewhere that GLP-1s may help with blood cancers. There may be an association with dementia. There may be an application for people who have addictions that it sort of dulls that. Can you talk a little bit about what we
Yeah.
may see in the future?
So Viagra was a blood pressure pill.
Oh,
Yes.
yeah.
Not anymore. It wasn't a very good blood pressure pill, by the way. Now they use it actually for pulmonary hypertension and for altitude sickness. So I climbed Kilimanjaro on Viagra. It was quite funny, but we use it to
You
prevent altitudes.
you
Yeah.
did?
Yeah,
Wow.
because it
That's
treats all.
interesting.
So you're right. Um, we know that these drugs, so we've already seen this. So there's a 20% reduction in heart attack and stroke, cardiovascular risk reduction. There's a treatment for fatty liver. In fact, Health Canada has now given semaglutide Health Canada approval for treatment of fatty liver, or metabolic liver disease. It's called metabolic non-alcoholic steatohepatitis, or MASH, or we just call it metabolic liver disease. The dementia data has not panned out. So that was a trial that recently was actually announced at the World Dementia Conference in December. They were looking at the use of this drug. And again, it was a randomized placebo-controlled trial, whether or not it would help slow dementia progression. And the answer was no.
Hmm.
There's a couple of small trials and one or two larger scale trials looking at both semaglutide and tirzepatide, so Ozempic / Mounjaro, in the use of substance misuse. And the studies are actually incredibly promising, showing a decrease in in particular, it's looked at in alcohol use, but a decrease in alcohol and alcohol consumption. And part of that has to do with how the drug itself works. So you have a part of your brain, we talked about the hunter system, the part of our brain, it's part of our brain called the mesolimbic system. And it's literally sort of a cluster. It's like a highway of dopamine sort of dopamine cells, dopamine neurons that snake through the brain, and it goes from your compulsion center to your reward center to pleasure and planning. It forms in all of us at age 10 and comes fully online at age 21, when our sort of prefrontal cortex, or goal-oriented behavior, officially comes on board. And it's a dopamine pathway with opioid receptors and nicotine receptors and cocaine receptors and cannabinoid receptors on it. And it also has GLP-1 receptors and GIP receptors and amylin receptors and glucagon. So it's got gut hormone receptors, because its actual purpose was to make us a hunter. So think about it. 50,000 years ago, we're sitting in a cave and one of us has to go run a buffalo down in our underwear in 90 below zero. Well, you have to be very, like, a little bit, yeah, like, to go do that, like me at a, sample sale, kind of crazy, right? So what that is literally, it's our hunter system, and it's been linked to everything, including cravings. It's been linked to addiction and substance misuse. It's been linked to ADD. It's been linked to binge eating. That's where those diseases live, in that part of the brain. And so if you think about it, if you can, and one of the ways we treat substance misuse disorders, we give patients, you've heard of Narcan, or
Mhm.
we give patients sort of a longer acting version of an opioid blocker, so that their brain's receptors don't click on, right? Well, this would be a similar kind of action, right? You literally blunt craving response by shutting I call it the little, the dragon falls asleep in the back of the cave, the hunter, and doesn't think, oh my God, give me this now, because it's literally gotten what it was looking for. And so I think what we're seeing here is a huge shift in culture around blame and shame and dieting, and this kind of idea of, of personal sort of fault and etc. around this. And I hope what we're embracing more is acceptance of diversity of body size and body shape, number one, that there is no longer this standardized quote ideal, number one. And more importantly, that we embrace the fact that this isn't a simple math equation of just eat less, move more. And if you're not getting the body we want you to get, it's because you're not working hard enough.
Well, amen to that. Dr. Zentner, this was fascinating, and it has really changed my mind about these drugs. So thank you so much for joining us. I really, really appreciate this conversation.
Thanks for having me.
All right, that was fascinating. And we bring back in producer Mel. Wow, I learned so much in that conversation that I have pretty much completely changed my idea and my thought around these weight loss drugs.
I'm curious because I did hear you say that during your conversation right near the end. And like you too, I was on the edge of my seat listening to everything. Flesh that out a bit for me. What do you mean by that you changed your mind? How did you change it?
Okay, well, first of all, I think I felt a little bit judgy because I thought I'm watching what I eat and I'm working out hard. And then I've got friends who are just, boop, taking a little injection and then suddenly they look fabulous. And I kind of thought, you're cheating. But after listening to her, she's saying, no, I mean, if you compare it to any other drug, when she said, do you take a cardiovascular drug or statins or whatever, it's the same premise that obesity is a disease and this is treating a disease, and we're just lucky that we have this medication now. So I also thought, well, maybe it is something that I would look at, or a microdosing. And she's saying, no, hand up, that would not work for you. You don't fit the criteria for it. So I do still have a little bit of concern that maybe there are young people or teenage girls or people who have eating disorders who are attracted to this who maybe shouldn't be. But then the doctor should be the gatekeeper.
Yeah, I thought there was so many things because she took us really from the place of understanding obesity and the stigma attached to the place of what these drugs are, the science of it. I thought the body mass index, I mean, honestly, tracing that back and the BMI becomes such a foundational thing that you hear. You go to a gym, they measure your BMI. So that was a big takeaway for me. But really, I felt she made this conversation accessible. The risks, a lot of people talk about that as a obstacle, but I've never heard anybody frame it and make it as accessible when she commented on the risks. But for me, really, there was one thing she said. She said, it all comes down to choice and agency. And really, maybe we just need to accept that, right? It comes down to our own choice and our agency in consultation with a medical professional. But
Right.
great conversation.
I loved it. And for anybody who was even potentially a little bit judgy like me, I hope that we all have expanded our thinking around this, because the reality is I've learned that your genes, you are just born that way, as Lady Gaga says, and there's not really a lot you can do about it. It wasn't like my mom Thelma eating too much. It was the way her body was designed, and she just didn't have a drug to help, and now people do. So amen. She may not call it a miracle, but it's certainly a game changer for a whole lot of people.
For sure.
All right. Thanks so much, Mel. That was an awesome conversation. Okay, so how do I feel about this? Well, like I said to Mel, I really have changed my mind. I think that it is about learning more, about having a deep understanding of how obesity works, that it is based in your genes and all the different hormones that come into play. So I do see the potential for it to change lives. And I do see the potential for it to also save the healthcare system a bunch of money, which maybe it does make a ton of sense to have government say, this is a drug for a disease that can ultimately save us all as society a bunch of money. I do also think that, I guess this is not a drug for me. And maybe I should be happy about that I am able to control my weight, keep it healthy through diet and exercise. So at the end of the day, I do feel like I've learned a lot, and I certainly have moved the yardstick significantly. So as for you, you do not have to agree with me. You do not have to change your mind. Just keep it open and stay curious. And thanks for joining us.
Change my mind.